You guys are good.
This is fun.
All right, call to order the public hearing, July 16th, 2018. Need a roll call?
Mr. Cox?
Here.
Mr. Sheebone?
Here.
Mr. Westbrook?
Here.
Mr. Lau?
Here. All right, the only item on the agenda for this public hearing is the proposed conditional use to run a child care center at 74 East Aurora Road, Lincoln, number 3. Besides the applicant, is there anybody here to speak to this? Someone coming down. Give him a second. Okay. Ask one more time, is there anybody here to speak to the proposed conditional use to run a child care center at 874 East Aurora Road? Sounds like there's not. Close, motion to close, move to close.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right. We'll start the regular meeting, 12:13 minutes or so. I didn't mind.
So yes, member. Oh wow. Comes next. Is this an updated one? Okay.
Want one in color, I guess?
This is supposed you're gonna. No, that's fine.
I
I
have
just,
it in color and
no, you're fine. I just wanted to do my second one. See if they address anything tonight. I don't know. As soon as I get it organized, I can just.
That was the real job.
Oh, I did. I didn't open it. Looked at it. You sent it like last night. Yeah. Okay. Call me anytime you need.
All right.
Could we have a public hearing on this?
This is just David.
well, no, it was up here. It was the public hearing.
I didn't even bring that.
And then it goes in order.
Right.
So, there's no minutes.
Yeah, there you go.
And then these are all. Yeah, and you can probably.
I think we ought to approve it. Do we have a public hearing?
Yeah, so this is the updated one, so this is.
Well, how can we do anything?
Hey, Brian.
Really, they should have said that first.
Besides,
Yeah, let's, this is the
it says,
updated.
we can approve it, but then we have a public hearing.
Yeah, you guys did the last meeting.
We did.
Yeah, I don't think anybody came. I mean, just the applicant.
That's true, sir. Yeah, if we all want to stop.
I don't remember.
We did?
Yeah, I would think that's. Two things real quick. This is all. Surveyors. Usually.
Yeah.
And the one we just heard about, this one there. They actually put it right here on the plan. So I think that's good.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, they're acknowledging that it needs to happen.
Well, he did suggest table.
Okay.
I think he suggests table. Anyway. I don't know why we have the public hearing if we're gonna table it anyway.
It's
suggest tabling it, I think. This is the child care thing, right? No, well, the child care center, the whole center. Are we talking the child care center? Yeah.
Number 5.
Order changed.
Because Neil didn't identify the date that you guys gave him the separate date.
Oh.
Remember?
Okay.
So I didn't before he came in. Yeah, I know.
I think we're supposed to table that.
Based upon what I was told. So.
Square middle.
Here's what you're thinking about. Ryan's last line. The question is, why did we have this public hearing and then have another one later? Because it'd be, it's coming back from the public hearing.
I also believe it's
Be two public hearings. Well, we're gonna table it. I think he's got too much to do. The fire chief has something to do with this too. He has to come here.
Yeah, no, that's not. That's crazy.
See this one?
Yeah, whenever you have something. Yeah, you're good. Whenever you have time, I get it. Yeah.
Good job. He's not here, is he? The chief.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's ask him.
We're worried about the shape. We don't already understand.
Yeah, so this is nothing you guys can deal with. So we're looking at it from, this is building codes, 2 separate codes. We're only doing this one, and you guys can make a determination if land use is acceptable. But this, if they have a property, they gotta do it separately. Yeah, so you guys can issue the rule, and if they can't get the department approval, that's on them. That's not doing
It's busy. It's raining.
Almost ready for my final seconds. Railing. Is there?
Well, Nina could probably come and inspect that.
Call to order the July 16th, 2018 Planning Commission meeting. We get a roll call?
Sure, Mr. Cox?
Here.
Mr. Westbrooks?
Here.
Mr. Chivon?
Here.
Mr. Bellotta?
Present. All right, first item is approval of the June 18th public hearing minutes. Did we have copies of that?
It should be in there. Did I not put it in there?
The regular meeting minutes. Let's see. But that's
I did this.
July.
You know what, it's not in there.
Okay.
It's my fault, that's my
We'll
bad.
come back to that next one, public June 18th. Okay, then the June 18th regular meeting minutes. Does anybody have any comments on those? All right. Mr. Cox is not here at this time. Okay. Anyone make a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes as submitted.
A second.
Abstain.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
And then the July 9th special meeting minutes, which I was not at. Do you have any comments on those?
Move we approve.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I'll abstain. All right. First item, Conditional use to run a child care center at 74 East Aurora Road, Unit 3. Somebody here for that? No.
Wait here for that.
We should come back. Why don't we come back to that? So let's give them a chance to get here. Move on to number 2. Proposal for a freestanding multi-tenant sign at KFC at 307 East Highland Road. Come on up. I know Mr. Grouse said that.
Hi, I'm Albert, Albert Sign Company, Albert Haggett.
Want to give us an overview of the sign?
Sure, so in conjunction, everybody's pretty familiar with you here. We were the master developer who subdivided the parcel at corner of Highland and Route 8. We sold one of the 2 newly created parcels to KFC. They own the southern lot, Mr. Alessio, Franco, who's here at past meetings to get his site plan approved, owns that parcel, and they are currently beginning construction of their project. What we're here before the board tonight is to discuss our request to construct a master sign that will be located at the hard corner of Route 8 and Highland Road, and that master sign is intended, is intended to display signage not only for the KFC parcel, but for the future development that will take place on the remaining north parcel that our company still owns. The former Motel 6, which is now Key Inn parcel, and the undeveloped parcel of land behind the Speedway that is currently owned by Land Law Investments, which is EMCO Development. You're probably familiar with them, and with the Get-Go Development across the street. And the reason that this all has come together like this is when we were buying this parcel, if everybody recalls, there's a common access right off of Highland Road that serves all these properties. And all these property owners through the years have put together various agreements for cross-access and so forth. And then when we came into the picture and cleaned up some of the access rights, there was a request and an agreement made with EMCO that if a sign is developed, they would have rights to go on that sign if permitted by the municipality. The same with the other players here. So, long story short, we're proposing let's call it a master monument sign of just over, just at 16 feet height in totality. Our original application was a little bit higher, but after some initial discussions with staff, it was asked if we could bring it down a little bit to 16 feet. So we modified that to the 16-foot high sign you see before you. It'll be a masonry base, same brick to match the KFC. Detailing of the sign cabinet will be the same as you're going to see on the KFC as far as materials, colors, and detailing. The top panel will be reserved for KFC. The second panel will be for our second parcel, our remaining parcel, and then you're going to have, and this one here is a little bit different but more conceptual. This panel here will be reserved for what is now Key Inn, and then this panel will be EMCO. And each of those users would come in and present its actual sign panel to the board, make sure it's acceptable with the board. But we are proposing the overall sign today. Albert here represents the signage company that we've hired to oversee this process for us, and is the actual applicant on the project here. So with that being said, I'll just open it up for questions and comments.
We'll go through, France, you want to start with yours?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a report dated July 11th. And as the applicant states, the request is for a brick-based monument sign that would sort of, as he described, be a master sign for those four parcels, 4 inserts, divided according here to my memo. KFC is 30 square feet. The one vacant parcel would be provided 35 square feet. The other 23, just under 24 square feet, and then Key Inn be provided a little over 31 square feet. The total is 121 square feet, again being 16 feet tall. The zoning code, section 117907 F3, limits the maximum area of the sign to 60 square feet. I think the applicant's aware of that. It's my understanding he has already started the process of seeking a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals for the additional area. The only comment I had in addition to the area issue, which you're already aware of, is the fact that the sign by definition of the code is considered an off-premise sign, meaning it's announcing activities off-premise, even though applicant is stating it's sort of a joint use, meaning announcing all those, and I think that's fine. It's actually better for the city to clean up and not have so many monument signs. But by definition of the code, they don't allow off-premise signs. So my recommendation was, the applicant's already initiated that variance process, to amend that and to request an off-premise sign as well, because by code, the planning commission can't approve it, announcing activities that aren't on a joint development parcel. A little different in, say, Macedonia Commons, which is a joint development parcel. So again, don't think it's necessarily an issue, it's just the code limits you. And then the other thing I just noted in my report is a previous version of the sign that I had seen did have the city seal attached to the base. That's been removed. I think it's been removed, it's my understanding, to be able to reduce the height of the sign down to the 16 feet. That's when the seal came off at the base.
And we can accommodate that. We didn't know the city's position on that. We're not asking, we're more than happy to include it as part of our proposal. When there was a 4-foot base, the proportions seemed correct. When we reduced it down to 3 foot to get that overall height down, it got a little tight, but we can still accommodate it should the planning commission and the board recommend it.
Sure, and I wasn't aware if that was something the previous administration wanted, and so and I felt that probably was the case, and if the previous administration wanted it, I felt you could achieve still having it on there, but just wanted to note that to the planning commission. So two issues, again, the area variance, which you've already made application for, and then the need to get a variance to permit an off-premise sign.
What I like to add that the normal process would be to go to the BZA first and get the variances, and then come to planning commission. Because of time constraint and because you didn't want to wait another month to make things speed up a little bit, we kind of reversed the process. You were at the planning commission first, but even if you are approved tonight, it's the understanding that you would have to get the variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. Can we do that?
You could do
We gotta get these variances.
we approve it, but with condition that the planning, the BZA would approve it, because if they don't approve it, then it's dead.
That's what Brian suggests.
Yeah, I think that if you have any positive recommendation tonight, you would need to make it contingent upon the variances, because you can't grant those exceptions. That has to come from the Board of Zoning Appeals. And that's perfectly acceptable for you to do, because if they can't get those variances, they're back to the drawing board. They can't go put it up, otherwise it's just an enforcement issue for Mr. Hall. I don't think anybody's interested in that. So contingent on that would be just fine.
That's a good question, Kevin.
Which box does key in? Which
Right
box?
there, the one you just pointed to.
This
Yes,
one here,
sir.
the big one over there on the bottom, yeah.
Yes.
Bottom left. And the city of Macedonia, what was the point of that?
So in much as was alluded to in talking to previous administration, this site is sort of a gateway location to the city of Macedonia. And much like the Commons has that same logo and everything announcing sort of a gateway into the development, we thought this was a good way to announce a gateway into the city of Macedonia. It's there at your discretion. We, will provide it and make it part of the project. If you guys don't want it, we'll remove it.
Well, there's no statutory requirement for that, is there? Nothing as part of the ordinance or anything?
No, we thought it
Maybe a
was a
good
nice
idea.
gesture and was appropriate with the location as you come into the city of Macedonia.
And I think, just having been around for a little while with the city, I think both previous administrations were trying to sort of dress up, in particular this area of town, and make a statement. I'm sure that likely is going to continue forward. It's an important planning area. It's part just at the southern edge, sort of the town center district. So it does make some sense to have it be a gateway to the city.
Well, it's kind of a branding thing. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. It's never going to be a bad thing. If we've already have that, continuity is going to be important to me, so.
The only thing, if I can, Mr. Chairman, I didn't note that's important, at least get on the table. There is an existing key-in monument sign that I don't know if the intent is to remove that. If you get the variance, they'll have their identification. I think the city would be, my assumption is, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but they would be inclined to want to see that monument sign go away, because the whole point is to have one as a central point that announces everything in the development.
So yes, I did discuss that with the present owner of that property. And he actually has two signs today, one on his property proper, and then one at the shared driveway. He is agreeable to delete the one at the shared driveway and replace it with this, so that will be replacing that sign. So we won't have a clutter. We're trying to clean up and don't have a clutter signage here at the main entry point here. Move it all to here. So that, and again, we would make that a condition to our approval.
That would be nice, actually. If you saw that sign, I was driving by to take a look at this, and I was like, gosh, I don't remember approving two signs, and Susan pulled the stuff, we did. But it would be, it would be great to just have one of those if they're gonna get their thing on this as well.
He's under the understanding that he will have to concede to that.
Was there any other staff comments?
I just have a comment, and just for maintenance issue in the future. You have 4 signs here,
Yes.
for 4 different parcels.
Yes,
But the sign is going to be on one parcel.
yes.
What about if this parcel where the sign is going to be sold, and they would not allow the other 3 owners of the parcel to go in and do the maintenance there?
There's
What
already,
happens then?
there's already an agreement of record that allows, that contemplates all that. Mr. DeFranco will own the sign, will manage the sign, will have the ability to charge back electric and maintenance to the other users. And the other users have the rights to go onto his property to change out or maintain their individual panels. That agreement's already in place and of record, and I can provide a copy of it.
So it's a building inspector, if there's a maintenance issue at that, who do you address it with?
The owner of the KFC parcel.
But he's not on that parcel though. You cite him, but it's not his property.
It is his property.
It's his property, he owns that property?
Yes,
Okay. He owns that property where the sign is located?
where it's proposed to be located.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
okay, okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I can, it sounds like it's like a reciprocal easement or something that you're
Yes.
gonna have.
Yes.
Is there like an LLC set up to manage maintenance and pay into it to ensure, for the city standpoint, and to the building official's question, it becomes an enforcement issue. And so, and that process is done through courts, and not that necessarily where it's gonna go, but it can happen in the future. So for the city standpoint, probably the preferred way would be like an LLC set up that there's fees paid into to be able to maintain the sign. So just something for you to consider.
Well, and point taken, the agreement's already in place. It was part of our plat filing. It was the same agreement that covered the shared access drive and how that gets maintained and utilities and everything.
So it's attached to each parcel?
It is attached to each parcel, yes.
Okay. I think that's fine then.
Parcel,
Mhm.
right?
It runs with the
with the
parcel.
land, yeah.
Yeah, it's irrevocable, runs with the
Yeah,
parcel.
that's why I said when it's matter of record, it's part of their title.
Okay.
It's all recorded. And it would take all four parties to change it.
And I think for the commission's sake, that's acceptable.
That works. Okay. Thank you. Any other staff comments? Or you guys have any other thoughts on this?
You can make a motion if you want.
I guess, yeah, a couple things to consider, you know, conditions,
Right.
PZ approval, and then
Right.
approval of the key and sign at the island.
Right. Well, I move we approve this, subject to the BZA approval on one or two issues that you're bringing up with them, and with the addition that we like the City of Macedonia sign on the brick.
Mentioned the removal of the key and sign.
Or, and removal of the existing key sign on that driveway.
Any other, or second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks. Next, proposed signage for Culvers at 8143 Golden Lane Boulevard.
Ladies and gentlemen.
The record, the names.
Jessica Rock. Yeah, Jessica, JESSICA, and Rock, RUFF.
Steve Scotty.
All right, just want to give an overview of the signage.
Yeah.
So we are proposing, we want to go through page by page because I have to.
It's up to you.
Okay. Some directional signage is on the first page. They will be internally illuminated. This is drive-through, these will be internal directional signage.
Very full length signage.
And then the second page is the drive-through canopy. This is where customers will place orders. And then the third page is the building signage. This will also be internally illuminated with LED. Same as the next page. And then the menu board, and so we'll just display items. They will be selling. That will be LED illuminated as well.
So this is, okay, this is one where you stick the panel in, it's not like, the panels I see.
Yeah, no. And then monument sign, this will be double sided, and this will be LED illuminated as well in the brick place. We'll have a reader board at the bottom there. Change the copy. And that will be done manually. Change the copy. And this is just a height factor, so no one's going bigger there, higher than.
Is that the height of the canopy over the drive-through, is that it's?
Yeah, that's the-
There's not a building,
No,
it's just.
yeah,
That's just a truck driven.
yeah. And just the address numbers, just not illuminated. So not in.
flipping through it, it took me a second to realize that this is an interior sign, like,
You're like, wait a
that's a
second, that's not.
giant sign where you're sticking it, but that's,
You would spend some time in front of that sign if you're gonna hold it.
Yeah. We're just
They
gonna-
do.
all right. We should have some comments, Mr. Frias,
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Report date July 11th. Basically, just for the sake of brevity, we've looked at this a number of times and it sort of changed a little bit, evolved over time. Area-wise, the sign's acceptable based on the frontages that were scaled off the plan, so they comply with the code. The only thing I come back to again, there is a reference, I know you said manual and your color illustrations show manual, but there is a reference in the additional document that you submitted that still references an electronic message center. And so,
Yeah, and it's gonna be manual. I talked to the architect about that, and, you know, they went back and forth. I was sure, you know, sent you a revised version, but it's manual, according with, the old link.
yeah, I've had like
Yeah.
a bunch of different, a lot of different versions come through. The one that got submitted with the packet still shows electronic message center. And so I would just encourage the commission, any approval you issue tonight would have the stipulation that an EMC, electronic message center, is not permissible in that district. So that takes care of that. And then, just as a side note, your previous approval, Planning Commission left some administrative review of the landscaping and lighting, and those were submitted separate to me under a different review approval. And just, again, just to give you the sake, just to tie back to the commission's approval, I felt the lighting plan was acceptable. And the only thing on the landscaping was a small revision. I've sent that off to Jeff Markley, your landscape architect, via email, that they just need to add some 6-foot-tall Austrian pines or comparable species to be compliant with section 117202A6 of the code.
Yeah, and we spoke about that, that's not a problem.
Good. Other than that, I'd recommend approval with that minor contingencies.
So are we looking for signage and the lighting, or was the lighting?
Lighting you left to be administrative approval. It was just more, I wanted to get back in front of you to say I received it, looked at it, felt it was acceptable, met the lighting levels that we've historically used. Again, it's just more, I'm already doing a report, so I wanted to let you know that we have looked at it administratively.
All right. Mayor, anything?
I've been brought to speed on it, I think everything's good, I don't have any problems with this.
Any other staff comments?
Just have a question so that we don't run into a problem in the future. I see you have some windows here. Do you plan on using those windows for signs also?
No.
or-
No.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's great.
That's no problem.
Thank you.
All right, so, Commission, you guys have any?
No, not really.
If you don't mind, in regard to the, we previous meetings talked about cutting off the old 8, with all the changes here locally. Actually, I sent you a quick email, Mr. Gelati. Is there a time frame or any assurances the city can offer on that cut-in, or any, anything other than, I was told that the funds were set aside, and it was set aside, and there's plans, and that's part of our, it's actually part of our site plan, the road is, we got committed to an entranceway wall and fence and whatnot, and without the road, we've got basically an entrance to nowhere. And, along with us basically reducing the size of our parcel for that road, and we really, and from a business standpoint, that's the only viable location with that road. Is there anything you guys can offer in terms of being able to give me a time frame or anything?
No.
No.
No, and I'll tell you why. There's been some developments with that. I think we're still on track, and the last I heard, I'm still getting filled in by the previous administration as to where that stood, but there was a few glitches that we had to work out.
Okay.
It's obviously complicated by other entities outside of us. I think we have everything in place that we need at this point, and I know that there's still a few bugs that need to be worked out. That's something I'm gonna place a priority on, because I know that was very important, not only to you guys, but to us as well, because that's gonna provide great access to that area, and we want that. That's not something we're gonna let go of. So
Okay.
we're working on it, but for me to give you a timeline, this is government. I can't.
Yeah, I understand.
You know, I'm very impatient, but
You know, any assurances we could have, you know, anything, or even just, would you be the follow-up contact?
I'm working.
I appreciate it.
that's what I can tell you. I mean, I'm 7 days in, so.
I just, believe me, I understand, bit of a whirlwind, yeah.
I'm trying to do the best I can here.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
You guys have anything?
No?
All right. They won't make a motion?
I'll try. I move we approve the sign and lighting plans as submitted with the caveat that there should be additional landscaping of certain trees that are mentioned in the memo, and also that an indication that there will be no electronic messaging on their sign.
Second. All right. Do you have discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
All right, thank you guys. Have
I guess the first applicant, we're going to go back to the proposed child care center, 874 East Aurora Road. I understand they're here.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you all for seeing this.
Who get your names for the record? James Gilliam.
Ricky Gilliam.
All right. Start why don't you go ahead and give us a little overview of what you're planning here.
I'm Ricky Gilliam, this is my husband James Gilliam. We're proposing a child care center at 874 East Aurora Road, unit number 3. Our goal is to have a child care center that serves children 18 months to 12 years old. We plan to have 4 separate rooms for those age groups, as well as our operation hours would be, what we're proposing would be from 6 a.m. until midnight. And that's of course enrollment based, so if we have families who are in need until that late, we will be open that late. But again, we'll close earlier based on enrollment. We did have prepared for you all some of the revisions that was requested in the memorandum. We'd also like to pass that out as well, that we received on Friday.
All the same. These all the same. Got it. We got extras.
We got more. All right. Okay, so that's the gist. You know, we have comments. Mr. France, do you want to go over comments, and then we can go back to this new plan and talk about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the request, again, my memo dated July 11th, the request is for a child care center occupancy and conditional zoning approval. The space is about 2,563 square feet interior, and then there's an additional approximately 1,100 square feet of outdoor play space being proposed behind the tenant space. The property is zoned B1 Convenience Business District. The use itself, so administratively, it was determined that it would be a conditional use request. I spoke with the zoning inspector, maybe early part of last week to talk about that determination. And I think that determination is safe if we have some additional follow-up from the planning commission. If you have your code book in front of you, section 1167.02. 1167.02 is the B1 Convenience Business District. And item 17 in the permitted uses is, I can read it for you. It states, uses not listed herein and which are comparable in character to those types listed may be permitted by the planning commission. Essentially what that is that's a similar use determination inside your code. It gives you some flexibility. I know we have, of the 4 members present, 3 of you guys are a little more new on the commission, but we've used this before with the planning commission in the B1 district, the similar use determination, and it's applicable here. So looking at the administration's decision, if you were to follow down to 1167.02C, conditionally permitted uses, in particular C4, it states post office, police and fire station, and schools. And so the administration's determination was that this is comparable to a school. I think that's true, that it is comparable to a school, but they are 2 different uses. In most, I'd say a little more modern zoning codes, schools and daycare centers, child care centers are treated differently in zoning codes. And so I think we can still get there with this being a use that's allowable in this B1 zoning district, but I think the commission can use item C4 as the basis to utilize item 17 above. So what that basically says is, if you agree with my crazy rationale, you can make the similar use determination to conditionally permit child care centers in the B1 district pursuant to 1167.02B17, and you would use C4 is your comparison, meaning a school is similar in nature to a child care center. If you were to take that action and make that separate motion, you would basically codify child care centers into the B1 district, utilizing again 1167.02B17. So I probably just confused everybody, and I can answer. I think we need to probably talk about that piece before I move on with the other issues, which are more performance-based issues than use issues. If you guys have
I
any.
think, you guys, does that make sense?
Quick question. You say codified, but it would just be for this particular applicant. We wouldn't codify it for everybody.
No,
3 more child care centers wanted to move in there.
No, it is actually that. So if you make a similar use determination in this zoning district, you're saying that child care centers are effectively permissible with a conditional zoning certificate within the B1 zoning district. When you do that, and I advise the zoning inspector, when you do that, if you make that recommendation and approval, the zoning inspector should note the official record, the official zoning code, to note your action. We have done this in the past in one other instance that I can think of, but you are effectively changing the zoning with that provision for the B1 district, which is not an uncommon thing. Many zoning codes give you that flexibility. I like that flexibility for a similar use determination. Some communities don't, because they take the hard stance that the only way to amend the zoning code is to go through a zoning amendment process. You know, your previous planner, who was your only planner prior to me, it's kind of a school thought he liked, and I worked for him, and so maybe that's where some of that comes from. But it does allow some flexibility from the commission to.
That other instance you mentioned, some other instance, was that another child care center in a B1 district?
No, it's a different use.
Oh.
But I've been told that you have on the ground some child care centers, daycare centers in the B1 district.
How did they get in if that's what they...
I don't know. I don't believe they were during my time. So there's a lot of things in zoning codes that get in, if you will, or are there existing that are, you know, non-conforming uses. Some of them, as Mr. Hall finds out, are just illegal uses that you have to go through an enforcement process, but I'd say they've probably been around for a long time.
As I understand it, even if we approve this, as you're suggesting, this is just step one for the applicants, right? They have to go through other hoops, right?
Yeah, I think that to get to any other discussion, the commission would need to make this determination that the use is acceptable pursuant to that 116702B17. If you do that, then kind of go to step B, which is, okay, there's performance type issues associated with this, and I've called those out in the second part of my memo, which the site plan being drawn to a 1 to 10 scale, it doesn't scale accordingly. Information about adjacent structures within 200 feet, it's more of a black and white performance standard, but it's good to know what's in the surrounding neighborhood. How does this use potentially impact those other uses and structures? But my biggest concern relates to the internal traffic circulation, because the way the plan was drawn, at least I haven't looked at the new one, but the 1,100 square foot outdoor space behind the tenant space looks as though, and I looked at the aerial photograph, it looks as though if that's fenced in, it's going to prohibit access to the other 2 units. And it looks like there's a rear access door to those units, probably for deliveries. And so if this outdoor space prohibits that, I think something needs to be figured out as it relates to that. Certainly the building owner should know that, sign off on that. The other thing is it also shows it right in the location where it appears the dumpster is. And so where's the dumpster gonna go? And if the dumpster's gonna go somewhere, I think other provisions of your code kick in, which would require that dumpster to be screened or brought up to current requirements, which does require 3 walls and a gated fence. So those are things that sort of kick into play, if you will, when you have a new occupancy. And then there was no information about, you know, we had some information that there's going to be probably a fence around this. What are the details of that fencing? Is there any new signage being associated with this request? Lighting, I didn't know if there was any new exterior lighting. Because it's a child care area, you're gonna probably, especially with your hours of operation, you're probably gonna have maybe some outdoor lighting for, just for safety purposes. If so, that would need to be shown on the plan. And then my other bigger concern then relates to off-street parking. There's 16 off-street parking spaces showing servicing the plaza. What I don't know is the other tenant spaces. I don't think they're occupied right now, but we want to plan for the worst case scenario. So there's additional square footage that could be allocated to any use in the B1 district, and some of the uses in the B1 district can generate a decent car count associated with those uses. So I think that the worst case scenario should be planned for. I don't know what that is, but the applicant should tell us what that is, and then we'll determine, do they meet the parking requirements, is a variance necessary? And again, we don't know that until we have a little more information from the applicant. So some data about those other spaces and what's happening there, and then a narrative, if you will, describing hours of operation, which the applicants explained tonight, so it gives the commission some better sense. And so it sounds like it's almost 2/3 of the day operation, 6 a.m. to late. And then that is just something that should be taken into consideration when you look at the conditional permit.
All right, I also want to speak to you about the dumpster issue. The dumpster is like it's on the property of 874, and it's really on the property 874. So that space is asked to the neighboring tenants to be moved. It might have to be moved because the way the plan is drawn out in the property scope, that dumpster to be moved in place, like I said, right here on the site plan. And the rear exits from the adjacent tenants next to 8743, there's like open area, like grass, tree, so it's not completely shut down like it was an alley, but it's also fencing will be moved to accommodate the square footage for the childcare area. So there will be a walk-through or pass-through if emergency or if anybody needs to exit or enter the rear of the adjacent buildings.
And currently, with the adjacent buildings, the backs are not being used with those two units at all. But we have made revisions to minimize the play space now to 775 square feet instead of the 1,100 that we initially planned for. So it makes it smaller, and now we have that pass-through, like my husband said, to allow for those adjacent units to have access to the back area. Also, in the revision, the dumpster has been moved over to the left now, and it's all according to how it was requested and covered. That's in there. The parking spaces to the front have been numbered, and all of the parking spaces, which at a count of, I believe it's 6, that's directly in front of the child care center, even the street parking space, which is labeled number 11, but that will be for the child care center. We won't need all of those spaces because, again, this is a pickup drop-off situation, so those spaces would really be used with the exception of staff members, and we have a count of 4 staff members. Worst case scenario, we may have 5 staff members, but that would be the max of the space as far as parking spaces are concerned.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So that tells me then, let's say it's 5, the worst case scenario, 5 employees. So they're at 11 spaces then dedicated to both drop off and pick up, as well as the 2 adjacent tenant spaces. So I think that even sort of solidifies more in my mind that we need an understanding of, is this enough parking for this complex? I'm not sure it is. And I don't know what that peak hour drop off demand is.
It's kind of like 6 to 9, then it's like totally dead, because from there it's all curriculum and teaching, then lunch, then you figure anywhere from 3 to 6:30. And after that, it's quiet.
So kind of similar to, from a traffic generation standpoint, an AM and a PM peak generators. And I just don't know how that could potentially impact with the adjacent tenant spaces. I also saw some comments from the fire inspector, and had at least talked to one or two of the planning commission members. The fire inspector cites the occupancy issue as it relates to the building code and fire code, which are issues that need to be worked through. From the commission standpoint, you're looking at the use of the property as far as land uses. If the commission were to make the determination and ultimately approve the child care center, the applicant still needs to get the building code, fire code approval. If they're not able to, they wouldn't be able to proceed forward regardless of your actions at the planning commission level.
And I can address that right now. The building as it stands right now is used as a mercantile building. What you're proposing is pretty much like a place of assembly. So you're placing more people in a building that it's actually built for. So that changes the number of toilet rooms that you're going to require. They're going to change the size of the exit. And I believe that your architect, just by looking at that, has done a pretty good job addressing that. What he has not addressed, though, that's going to be a major item is, because of your 4 rooms where your children are going to be, you can have, I believe, 42 children in there. Well, those 4 rooms, they do not have a direct exit to the exterior. You have to go through a corridor to go to the main exit. And according to the fire department, because they don't have a direct exit to the outside, those rooms may need to be sprinkled.
Well, my understanding for the fire code, absolutely, buildings over 12,000 square feet for sprinkled. And when the exits are less than 500 feet away from the entrance, it is not required. That's what my architect has been doing for me for about 10 years.
I have shared drawing that you gave me with the fire department, and those are his comments, so I just want to share it with you.
Okay.
We're not here to debate whether it's needed or not, I'm just telling you that that's what he's requesting.
Okay, and is there somewhere we can reference that?
We had a conversation with your architect about this, and he's aware of it, so.
What about the fire alarm guy?
I'm sorry?
The fire alarm protection zone? You done the fire alarm
The
system?
gentleman who gave us the drawings.
Well, the architect and
Yeah.
protection zone, they're different.
I'm sorry, what's the
Paul
alarm guy?
Nelson.
Yes.
Paul Nelson.
Paul, yes, he's the person we talked
Yeah,
to.
he does the fire alarm.
Yes. We talked to him, yeah.
Likes to
And
go to
he
fire alarm.
was not aware that sprinkler system may be required or needed there.
Well, okay.
Okay.
It's things like that, it sounds like something architecture and our guide may need to have some more discussions.
Yeah.
Make sure everybody's on the same page and interpreting everything the same way.
However code says, whatever law says, that's what we usually go by.
I'm trying to, I guess, was there any other staff comments that, Mayor, did anything?
Is this the property that I asked you about today, the used car dealer?
This is where Calvetta Brothers. Right next
Yeah,
door to
just-
City
that's
Tire.
over.
Right next door to City Tire.
That I saw a sign for used car dealer, and I'm thinking about the parking, which I don't know that we were ever brought up to speed on that one, so.
I know
I'm thinking about the parking, if they have a used car dealer in there, and you're down to 11, and this guy has, say, 5 cars, I mean, we're down to, but I don't know.
Is that what that business is? It says something, Cars to Go or something?
Cars to Go, I'm not.
And it's got this yellow chain out. You guys know anything
Yeah,
about
we
it?
saw that.
Yeah.
Well, we can talk to the owner and the people who hold the lease to see what their business requires. So we'll know what we can dedicate for our business, for these parking spaces.
Yeah, the owner of our building, can dedicate spaces, within the lease without a problem.
We just gotta see what's needed to make it all work.
I had never noticed that business until I drove by there last night.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking about the parking spaces, what you were saying, if they're selling vehicles, obviously, they're gonna suck up a lot of the spaces that are there, and that's a little concerning. But I'm gonna focus on what you guys need, so.
Yeah.
We'll take care of that, don't worry.
Do you know, is there any kind of, cross-access agreements with, like, the city tire property? The parking lot, I mean, if you just walk out there, you wouldn't know where one thing ended.
Yeah, we talked to the landlord about that.
Yeah, so we want to see where we go from here before we even introduce ourselves and for asking for stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, within law, that's all of our territory, they just kind of, I
Yeah,
guess,
they
do while
set
it's
their
vacant,
stuff
so they just
there.
kind of let people park over into our area, which of course, we're gonna be, our proposed areas that we're gonna be there, so that would be no further.
Okay, that's, curious. Yeah, it even looks like on the side of the building, there's a couple of parking spots.
Yeah, those
hanging
are the
in.
schools,
Yeah, there's 2 dedicated parking spots on the side of the building.
Yeah, I mean, you may even look at, is there any, I mean, it's tight back here, but is there any way you can use any of that? You know, like where you put the dumpster, employee parking be somewhere?
Yeah, absolutely, I mean, with all of that being our space,
We can kind of
we
utilize.
can use it, it's all usable space for the center.
It doesn't look like there's any, I mean, you could drive through the back of it and get to
Yeah.
Valley View, but I don't know if it's really your access, or is it?
I think it's connected to the parcel.
I wasn't sure if they actually had frontage on Valley View, or maybe that's an agreement, you know, something like, it might be a shared or.
Chairman, there's, the parcel we're talking about does not really have frontage on Valley View. It comes to a point.
Does City Tire have, because there is some kind of driveway back there, so it's City Tire.
I've got to assume it's City Tire.
It may be something, if you talk to them, maybe it's, you know, they're allowed to come out your driveway and you're allowed to go out their back, or something like that. Could be some kind of agreement, just.
We're sharing both. They're sharing our front.
Yeah,
and their rear.
yeah, something like that, there could be some kind of agreement, but that may make you wanna rethink the trash, you know, the enclosure there, how we can say that, I'm not sure, to maximize your. So Brian, issues tonight that there's the conditional use request, and then other issues that you got for the site plan and some things that need to be looked at. Your architect didn't give any details on what building square footage requires for parking, do you? I know there's 16 out there.
Well, no,
Like,
not
based
based
on
on building
service.
required, it's kind of like a mixture of city and state. We're trying to meet ODJFS rules and regulations, so they only require like 4 parking spots for transportation and drop-off zones.
Okay.
But for the city, you gotta see what the city wants, we can accommodate that as well.
All right, but
Sure, please.
Before us right now, we have to decide is it's a similar use. Before we go any further, we have to decide that we think it's a good situation for a similar, conditional, similar use permit. And if we say yes, then the next step is a public hearing on that issue. Right.
That's what we had at the start.
We had that public hearing on that
Public
one.
hearing. No one was here.
No one was here on that.
Okay.
That one's,
Yeah, you,
Was easy.
Neither was I, evidently.
that's sort of in a quasi way met that requirement already.
we can approve partially, can't we approve we say it's permitted, subject to going through all the conditional zoning certificate process with all the, I think would be subject to that, so we could approve, so they can have something done tonight. I think that we could say this should be a permitted use, subject to them meeting all the conditional zoning certificate process, which is another code section. And there's quite a few hoops to run through for that one. Is that about right?
And Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
and think it's similar to what you just stated. The only thing I would recommend you do tonight is, if you're comfortable making the similar use determination, I'm comfortable with that from a planning standpoint. Make that conditional, or that similar use determination as a conditionally permitted use, similar to schools under C4. And from there, I would not do anything with the conditional zoning certificate until the requirements of 113704 are met, which
Right.
Will require some refinement of the site plan. Again, some of the narrative provided with the use, and then some investigation into parking, the dumpster, access, those things. And I would suggest, if your architect has drawn this up so they could provide this on a scaled sheet, I would suggest either 11 by 17 or, better yet, a full-size sheet would be my preference. To have this, and that's just a matter of clicking print to a different size. That'd be more helpful to understand distances, as Mr. Westbrook's pointed out. It comes, the engineer said, it comes to a point. How do you access out the Valley View? Are there cross-access easements? All things I think would be part and parcel to any approval or part of the discovery as you go through the conditional zoning evaluation. I wouldn't do that until you have that information. But
So
I think
we
you could
would
do
table, we
similar
would
use.
table it then, in other words, we'd approve this portion of it and then table it for coming back again. Can we do that? suppose?
Yeah, I think so. I think if the commission's inclined to accept it as a similar use to schools, that paves the way, so to speak, for the applicant to at least now go forward and cover these black and white issues, which are not use issues, but they're issues
right,
nonetheless. And give himself time to work through with the administration on the fire code issue that's been talked about as well.
So with that, Kevin, does that sound right to table it then, partially table it, and it would be?
Yeah, I guess, what we could do is make a conditional use determination.
Okay.
Is that the
And
correct
just keep
terminology?
it at that.
Conditional use determination.
Similar use.
Similar use.
Similar use, yeah. And then what, defer it or table? I guess the word's table.
Yeah, then we would table the site plan, I
Want me to give it a whirl here?
think. Sure.
Well, I'd move we'd approve the applicant this way for the, under 116702-17, allow, in the B1 district, allow this daycare center, similar use as a daycare center, as under conditionally permitted use, similar to one as a school under 116702C4, which will be allowed. And as for the rest of the application for the conditional use process, we would then table the remainder of their request at this time.
Should we keep this separate?
I would recommend you keep them separate.
Maybe just do the similar use determination.
Today.
And we'll
All right,
see.
all right. Okay, then I amend that we, it would be the similar use today.
I second that, for the similar use.
All right, more discussion on that? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so similar use determination, we approved that.
Thank
Just
you.
allow the daycare center before there.
What would the other one be?
I think we basically table the conditional use request and site plan. Is that
Right.
Is that correct, or is it just?
Yeah, I would encourage you to table the conditional use request, which requires an associated site plan until the applicant meets the requirements of 113704.
Yeah. I would move we table the conditional use and application and the site plan at this time.
I will second that.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chairman, I think I heard the commissioner state in accordance with the requirements of 113704.
113704, right. In accordance with 113704.
All right. Got a motion, get a second.
Yeah.
Any other discussion? All in
It's this
favor?
one down here.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, opposed?
Difficult.
All right, so the rest of the table, but I think this gives you a goal in the right direction.
Okay, question. From this point forward, do we have a occupancy permit? We have to submit that to OJFS?
No, until you get, I think, a site plan approved in your detailed drawings, you won't get a occupancy permit.
Okay, also within that request, is this not suffice enough so that way I'll know how to go back to the architect and let him know what needs to be revised, or you just need it
A
bigger?
lot of this may apply, but it's tough, partially because it's site, but for the staff to do a proper review. You know, there's things they checked and it looks like, okay, I see you put some stuff in here about the dumpster, I see there's some information about the parcels all around it. But they need to be able to spend some time and look at that and verify and check it. It would be helpful on a bigger thing, but I think, you know, bringing issues like this, hey, got time to do it, that's great. But they typically, unless it's like one little thing, it's tough for them to, on the fly, make a review and approve something.
So we'll get some larger drawings out probably within the next 48 hours or so to you all.
Yeah, and that'll help them, and then you can work back and forth.
Now, there's another question. How long is the plan review after we submit? One is I'm asking because I gotta pay the guy rent, I got contractors, I got everybody in limbo.
So we're on time frame with
And I got,
ODJ.
yeah, like it takes what?
It takes them
60
120 days.
To even process it out, we can have to be getting the
Okay.
occupancy permit.
Right now, we got, what's our next meeting is scheduled August. Third Monday.
Yeah, it would be the
Third Monday, whatever that
I think
is.
it's the 20th.
But then, yeah, I'm not sure if we, it's the 20th, is there, it's on our agenda that says what the dates are.
Deadline would be July 30th.
So you have to have stuff in at least by July 30th to make it for the August 20th.
We'll go ahead tomorrow.
And, I mean, that's even better, and then it gives us more time for back and forth and coordination. And then, you know, if everything can be worked out, maybe we can get that approved on the 20th.
The approval is basically just the outside things.
That's what that's what the planning commission is most concerned with. You still have internal stuff to deal with the building department.
We really have got
You
that
can-
far.
But you can still, I think, work on it at the same time.
I mean, we're gonna request a site plan showing how many parking spaces you have for the whole building, how many parking spaces are required for the mercantile use that's still existing there, how many are you gonna require for your own business, so we can make a determination whether you have enough parking there. If you don't have enough parking, then the next step would be to get a variance for that. We don't know at that point because we really haven't gotten any numbers.
The outside is holding up the inside. Okay, we'll get on.
Yeah, parking could be,
That's not
seems like everybody's concerned about the parking.
We're lumberyard.
Can I just completely agree with the building commissioner with only one clarification. On the parking issue, the commission could, under 117111D, allow shared parking. And so there may not be a need for variance depending upon your investigation and what you find. So that information will be very helpful and you could share that with the administration. But the commission does have some latitude to allow shared parking depending upon the other uses, their hours of operation, their demand. You may not need to have the exact number of spaces outlined in the code. You could potentially have a reduction, but we won't know that until you tell us what's needed first.
Okay, so talk to the owner and the occupants and ask them what they require and just have them say.
And what the uses are, and then, again, worst case scenario. That's what we're always looking at, worst case scenario.
Give yourself some room with the parking. Give us some spaces.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next is proposed reconfiguration of lots at Greystone Building. Hello.
Brendan Hollow.
I'm going to give an overview of what we're doing and why.
It's a dual purpose in our amended plat, and our attempt for our approval. First is sublots 20 and 19 as they are in existence. As you can see, both lots are running on a diagonal to the street. They're not perpendicular to the street. They actually go in two different directions. The sublot 19 actually angles towards sublot 20's exit onto the roadway. In hindsight, we should have caught it already some years ago, but that didn't happen. That's the first purpose. The second purpose is the housing market has changed since we started our neighborhood. They want a little bit larger home, and all of a sudden I'm getting many calls for ranches. And our lots were not designed for a ranch product. Not all of them were designed for a ranch product. So our attempt is to meet the market with a different lot, a little bit larger, so we can have space between homes. And if somebody comes along and wants to purchase a ranch, that will have that capability. That's the two reasons to bring this plat in front of you, revised plat in front of you. So this would be the dotted line on sublot 20 and the opposite dotted line on sublot 19, going in two different directions from each other. They have to exit, so this garage is up on 20s as sort of perpendicular to that lot line and has to come down into the roadway.
Made sense to somebody at some point, but
Yes.
it seems like it's going to be a better way out.
Yeah, I think so. And again, a little bit more space between the homes and our need to build a ranch for the buyers when they come along. We've had obviously struggles over the years because of the railroad. We were fortunate that the city agreed to allow the quiet zone to come about. which we've helped with the maintenance of that, the maintenance dollars. We have provided a few dollars to that, plus the neighborhood as collecting money monthly to add to that maintenance fund. So that has finally got us to the point where we can comfortably sell a home to somebody and not worry about foreign flowing and, yes.
It took me a minute, I went out to see this, and it took me a minute to realize the road wasn't there.
Yes.
Yeah. Up and down 3 times a day. I finally saw the other street. And
Yeah,
realized-
and it's a good point. The road is not changing, the infrastructure, the sewers, the water line, the electrical, none of that's changed. The roadway is remaining the same as platted originally.
All right. Branch, you'll start.
Sure, I think that's a good point. This really is a lot configuration, reconfiguring the lots to meet the demand that's being requested. And so, Chapter 1113 of the subdivision regulations come into play. There's an original approved plat, and this would need to amend that plat. So it's a lot, it's a replat of sublots 19 through 24. I have no concerns with what's being proposed. I think that it meets the requirements of the subdivision regulations. The only question I had was if there was an HOA approval, if one existed, you would need to provide that HOA approval. I think it's a minor issue, but it looks like the applicant already has something in his hands, and I saw prior to the meeting, there's a plat that shows the HOA signature on there, so there obviously is one. My only other concern that I heard, just more of a question since you brought it up, you said you were receiving a lot of calls for ranch homes.
Yes.
What I don't know, because despite being here for a while, I did not review this development. It predates me. I don't know in those HOA docs if there's a look-alike clause in there. If there is, I think we should know that, at least from the administration standpoint.
Can't say one way or the other whether there was or not. We had 6 different models, and we added a ranch quite some years ago, and only got a call for 1. 3 of the models were not popular, so we added other couple of models to make, again, meet the demand of what the market called for. So we've not had to go back and get approvals on the lookalike from the city up to this point. We built 3 ranches on the street that we're working on right now, which is Pepperell Court. We have 3 ranches. They have little dissimilarities to them. But that's, you know, I can't tell what's going to sell here, but I have a feeling that the calls that we're getting from the realtors are, you sold that ranch, when are you going to put up another one?
Yeah, so I only bring up that you mentioned it, so it just set
Yeah.
my hamster on its wheel a little bit. So it sounds like you acknowledge that if there's a look-alike clause there, you'll adhere to it,
Right.
because you're doing that elsewhere, it sounds like, in the development.
Yes.
I have no concerns after that.
Okay.
One thing I asked, that's something, you know,
It's a copy.
I just,
This is approval of HOA. You could get him a copy back.
Oh, yeah.
Email letter.
Do you want me to email it to you?
yeah, that would be fine.
Subdivision, this was
It'll come
updated.
to our, as a, looks like
This was updated before.
Original.
With the reserves and records. Or, these all have, look-alike structure. So would it be required to be updated, or is this just?
Yeah.
These grandfathered?
That's what you're proposing.
the dotted line,
The
dotted
dark
line is proposed.
Assumption
The
that
dotted line is
administrative
existing.
is
Yes, sir.
not something.
Yeah. would be
Yeah.
required. Then that does it.
Bill, any other comments?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I agree. This layout is much cleaner. We reviewed the plat from a surveying point of view. It's acceptable to the city, so I know that the applicant brought the Mylar in, it's signed by the surveyor. The usual order is that the Mylar is signed by the surveyor, then by the owner, then by the city, you and I, Chairman. So, you know, if you're prepared to sign, I think we are.
I don't have that type of pen.
I don't have one on me either.
So, if, you know, if his signature is delayed, we still can go and put it in the street, so it's not being held up. And I also need to get the chairman and the trustee.
He'll be signing as the owner's consent for the HOA. Okay. Yeah.
So if it's in a location that we can come in
Here's,
on time.
yeah, here's what you can even take it with you if you'd like, so that you can sign as the owner, the HOA can sign for the consent. Bring it back to Susan,
Okay.
and then Kevin and I can sign next time we're in the city hall.
Great, thank you.
That's what we'll do.
Any other comments?
Quick question, are those dedicated roads back there?
Private roads are not. Pendleton is, yes.
I'm good, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? You guys have anything?
Move to approve the reconfiguration of the plat as submitted, and that's it.
All right.
Second.
Aye. All right. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All right.
All right, thank you very much.
And, yeah, we want to plat to take the.
What else do we have?
Good night.
You never get anything on Speedway, did you? Where's the write-up on Speedway? I guess I missed that.
Yeah, just bring it back when you get a sign, bring it upstairs to the building, Joe and I. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that one, okay. What did Brian say about that one? I don't remember.
All right, next. Just the pole barn.
The next one would be the Speedway.
Okay, we're not Speedway, but they're not going to be here this
We're
evening.
gonna go to August.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Then it is the proposed pole barn at 8527 Shepherd Road.
Good evening.
Please state your names for the record.
Neil Wolf, Neil Construction Company.
Tom Darrell, pole barn. So you guys, yeah, you were in last one?
Yes.
Okay, and we got some changes, requests for some comments. I'm assuming
They're all
taken care of.
Too much paper.
Just want to give a quick overview of what you did change since the last time.
Absolutely. Number one, on June 16th, we agreed to do 10 feet off the side setback. We had a surveyor give us a revised site plan that's been submitted. We had the two windows on the north side. We moved the exit entry door to the left side of the garage. Two doors, one in the back of the pole barn, one in the front, both with nice looking gables with asphalt matching shingles over the service doors. We spaced out the 10x10 commercial door and the 8x7 door, so it's more aesthetic in the front of the pole barn. and I believe, oh, and the drain, and the French drain, and thank you, and the French drain and the pole barn. I believe that's it.
Okay, okay. Mr. Francis, over here. Any comments?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't really have a lot of comments, just doubling back to my previous report. The revised building elevations have been provided. At the direction of the city's design consultant, the applicant did provide some architectural ornamentation on the left side elevation, as was just previously stated by the applicant's agent. And then I had previously recommended some architectural element on the north elevation to break up that long building expanse. 2 windows have been provided on that right side elevation. So just for the commission's sake to know that that's what's been provided, and you should confirm if that's acceptable. And then the stormwater issue, again, just to make sure that that French drain is adequate enough to capture the water that's being generated by this particular structure. And then finally, not stated here, but just to reiterate, one of the discussion items from last time we talked about this was the use of the structure is more for storage, and this is not a structure that's going to be used for a business or an apartment or anything like that. That's what the applicant stated last time. We heard that, so he brought you in for proof. Yeah.
They breed overnight too.
Yeah.
The toys multiply.
So I think they've substantially addressed those concerns and felt that you could approve this subject to final confirmation of the architecture and the engineer's approval of the stormwater issue.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I didn't have a memo ahead of time, but just one question, though. I see on the updated drawings, you've got the downspouts tied in to a French drain, just shown with a circle here. What are the dimensions on that circle? I assume it's a pit of 57s?
Yes.
Okay.
And the technical French drain is 5 by 5 by 5. I have no issue if we make it 6 by 6 by 6, 7 by 7 by 7. It'll be, 57, like you said. Generally 18 to 24 inches of gravel. And a downspout, instead of being unsightly, it'll be underground and go into the Earth's water table. Now, one point that I discovered when we met the surveyor there, the Durham's land, as it is now, does not migrate off of their land. It's not sloped to a neighbor left, right, or rear. So we have no issue with migration of water staying on their site and going into the French drain.
Okay. So are you saying that the French drain shown with the circle here, you're proposing a 5 foot by 5 foot by 5 foot deep pit of 57s?
Yeah, minimum.
I would agree. Yeah, that would be the minimum.
Yes.
Okay. No, that's good. And we probably should, it should be shown then, those dimensions on here. Otherwise, I think we're good, Chairman and Brian.
Schultz, you had a...
Yeah, could I ask why you put the 2 doors on the side elevation? Is that like a?
I can answer that. So, one, so that, first of all, I always want to have 2 ways out of the building for
Absolutely.
safety concerns. Also just because, like, the openings of our yard are, the kids' toys and things like that, like the play set and things are near the front. So, that's all. The other thing is, I have safety concerns about the back or the other side, because we can't see them from our, we're not lifelong residents of Macedonia, but yet we were invited into the city 1 week after we lived there with vandalism. So I would rather not have anything that we can't monitor.
Yeah, so we've added the 2 windows on the north side, but
I have concerns.
Yeah, we have serious concerns about it. We can't see that from our home.
Yeah.
And with having vandalism to our car in our driveway.
Yeah, 10 feet from our home.
And not having lived in Macedonia for less than 2 weeks, and people traversing through this area, because it's a woods, we've seen people that we don't know walking through our property. I have serious, I mean, we put them there because it was at your request, but I have serious security concerns about 2 windows that I cannot see from my home. They could be broken into and I wouldn't notice ever until I set foot in the structure. I would have no
I mean,
idea.
I wouldn't be opposed to false type windows, just use architectural. My role is to use some kind of, or have architectural standards for the building. And so one of the requests that were made was to put a gable or to make some interest on the elevation that you could see, which I believe is at the east elevation or the front elevation. That's what you're gonna see the most. So,
You mean from the street? I'm sorry.
from the street.
That's the side.
That's the east with the,
Yeah.
the
With the
large doors, the, yeah.
So the large garage doors are not accessed from your driveway?
They're straight on, they face the road.
Yeah, that's the only side that faces the east side.
That's what I'm saying. The front elevation is the one that faces the road. That's the front elevation.
Correct.
So in my opinion, I believe that's where you should have all of your architectural elements. There's a code that indicates that we're not allowed to have, or pole buildings are discouraged. So I was trying to add interest by asking for a gable on the front of the building, or the front elevation.
I thought you wanted a gable over the service door, and since our meeting 1 month ago, we moved the service door to the left, still giving you the gable. If you have a 30 wide by 40 deep pole barn with a gable over the 10 by 10 and a gable over the 8 by 7, I don't think that.
No, it was a gable only over the man door.
Oh, there are gables over the man door.
Right, but there was the man door in the front. It was adding visual interest to the front elevation, which is the most visible elevation. Those were my comments,
Okay, so
based upon pole barns being discouraged in the city. So I'm trying to add visual interest or something to the front elevation that is most visible from the street or from your house.
Do you have an issue with moving the one man door back to the center?
It just, I mean, safety exits out the front, very available.
Yeah, I mean, there's already
Not
2
along the
doors.
side. So when I think about functional use and his safety, you know, if he's out there, or my children's safety. if they're
Is there
out
another way to add some type of visual interest to the front elevation, like a vent
Tinsel?
with?
Tensils?
You could see,
Put a
it's way
circular
back,
vent
isn't it?
in the gable.
It's way back, this is their house, I guess. The road.
What about something like
The Shepherd
this?
Road. Yeah.
If you're not gonna add the door,
Great.
vent with corbels or something that gave some kind of three-dimensional quality to the front of the building.
Can I see that a little closer?
Susan?
I think he wants them in front or something. Okay, you can see it. Well, maybe down the driveway.
It's up to you.
We don't want
Would that, could that be in lieu of the gables over the doors on the side? Would they still be, yeah.
I'll do the gables over the side, and I can put a decorative gable over the front.
Something to add some type of visual interest so that,
I don't have a problem with that. You like that?
That's fine.
So I understand you're trying to balance usefulness
Yeah.
along with
Aesthetics.
aesthetics, you know, I mean, the doors, yeah, a third door on the front thing.
Yeah.
You can-
No, I mean, I guess you don't have to raise
Also,
the ground.
because the depth of our lot, I don't even know how much is, like, because of the way that the road is and the fact that our driveway
I don't
rises,
think you'll see
you're
this
not
from
gonna
the
see
street
that
anyway.
from the street, pretty much
Yeah, the whole
anyways.
building's
The
pretty
whole
much
building is
obscured
almost,
from the street.
because we're so far behind our home and our front lot
And
is
there's no sidewalks
very
on the
deep.
road either.
There's no sidewalks, there's no anything, but.
sure.
So is that in lieu of the gables over the man doors?
I think the gables add visual interest to the side, and if that's what you're gonna see the most of, I would encourage that. also just believe you should add some type of visual interest to the front so that it doesn't look like a pole barn, which is not permitted according to the code.
We can add a vent. We can do a decorative vent.
And then another comment that I had was just to verify that the type and the color of the siding and the roofing is going to match the existing.
It's gonna be a perfect match to the existing dwelling,
That's great.
except there won't be a vent on the wall.
Any other comments?
Thanks for your patience. Had I known you were pregnant, I would have asked the commission to move you guys up. I can appreciate that. I've been through it twice myself with my wife. I'm also sorry for what has happened to you, and I'd like to talk to you about that, because I think you should have a little more confidence in this community and not be scared, because we're not that community. I want to make sure that you feel.
I don't think it was you.
I hope it wasn't me.
It was me, I'll take it.
But the main thing that I want to talk about, and something, you know, I spent 11 years on council, and the biggest problem we run into is stormwater. So I think you guys kind of worked it out with Joe, but you said, well, at least 5 by 5 by 5. I mean, I want to bolster that, because if we can do anything to resolve those types of issues, we keep running into them. They keep getting worse. So maybe overdoing it's not such a bad thing sometimes. And I mean, 57 limestone is not at an extraordinary cost, but I'll let you work that out with Mr. Gelati.
I have no issue. You tell me if you want 7 by 7 by 7.
Well, it can't be undersized, I guess I would make that
Correct.
statement. Yeah, so if we want to make it larger, you know, I'm all for it.
If the board wants, what if I just say we'll do 7 by 7 by 7?
I agree. That sounds fine by me. You know, and to his point, you know, it is in an area, if we look on the topo here, he has a pretty good distance from the neighboring property, and you know, it's a wooded area, so I don't foresee.
There's
any
like a
real
ravine
issue.
on the other side of, like,
The
Newbury
neighboring
South.
property has a ravine and creek that handles.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's make it 7 by 7 by 7.
Agreed.
And finally, I'm jealous, because I want one.
Sure, these chairs will be available somewhere.
Bring it up. Ask. Was, last time we had a long discussion about brick to grade and these things like the whole barn. I don't think,
We had a big discussion.
requiring that.
Can I say something, Joe? The technical definition of a garage is a continuous footer, and then you can choose brick or block. Block and then with brick or not. About a month ago, Nino and I had a discussion. The technical definition of a pole barn is post-construction and not continuous footers. Now, if we want to change the definition, let's talk about it, but every time a homeowner wants a pole barn, I don't talk about a continuous footer, and then you said you'd be on the board meeting this evening, so you can.
I think your confusion here is when you apply for this and you give us the drawing really didn't specify, it's pole building / garage. So the question is, which one is it?
Oh, I wasn't aware. It's a pole barn.
Well, it's not what the drawing says. It says pole barn garage. So, you know, you needed to be a little more specific in which one is gonna be. Because it will make a difference. I mean, a garage, if you have a detached garage and it's that humongous, you're definitely gonna need footers.
Yes.
But a pole barn,
I'll make a note I'll make a comment to my architects.
okay,
It's a pole barn,
okay,
total pole barn.
okay.
So cross out pole building.
Yes,
I'll put that simply.
big toy chest.
So I'm not sure if it was resolved. Are the windows on the north side required?
Or you mentioned something about a false
Like we mentioned last time here, I think I mentioned that 2/3 of that north side faces woods.
Right.
Um,
What are your thoughts? I mean, I would love the architectural interest, but I also can appreciate if they're facing woods and no one's gonna see them. Can we add a window to the other side for visual interest?
Yeah, I mean, that'd be fine to move it to the other
I
side.
would love to move both of them to the
That's why we
other
never-
side.
Between the doors?
Yeah.
So,
Can,
if I-
can your neighbor see the plain side at all?
Probably like the
So they
first-
have a detached structure that might obscure their view anyways. Trying to think their line of sight, it's not quite showing.
I mean, I would say the end of their home is.
I don't think they could simply because their detached garage would block their view there.
Mr. Chairman, if I can, the idea, actually, my preference was a gable on that side. The whole idea is to break up the massing. It's a pretty long wall, very close to a property line. I get that there's woods there now, but that doesn't mean there's always gonna be woods there. There's always not necessarily gonna be the same neighbor there. And it's a lot of massing of a long wall right on the property line. That's why I felt some architectural ornamentation on that facade. It doesn't have to be windows. If, you know, if I had a vote in the voting game, it wouldn't be windows as more as it'd be a gable of some sort to break up the massing in the walls. Inoperable windows, I think, are ridiculous, in my opinion.
How about a compromise of, again, since the back half of it is mostly woods, how about if we leave this front window, remove this rear window and put it over here?
What are your thoughts?
So leave this stays, and it's hard to see.
That's the south side.
Remove this one and move it to.
In between the doors.
So basically taking this off and adding.
Then you can see the kids.
And on the north side, the window was in center.
And leave the other, and leave one window there and that long wall?
Yeah, since that's what they're.
He's asking for it.
Well, I share your concerns before we go, a window, and.
My preference would be to move them both to this side, but I mean.
No, I think you brought up a valid point about, you know, from a security standpoint, you don't see that side of the building, and someone can break in there and things like that. Whatever,
Yeah, I mean, my preference would be to move both these
the window
windows.
there is not, doesn't look bad at all. But to Brian's point, what else could you put on that long wall, Brian?
Again, I know it adds some cost, but I had suggested a gable on that. I know you had suggested gables over there's a lot of misinterpretation of what was talked about that night. You know, I think the left elevation is pretty far off of the other side property line.
In the middle of a wall. the
I
other-
know there's woods there now again, but they don't necessarily mean those woods are always gonna be there, and it's a lot of massing close to a property line. Most
This is
zoning
a-
codes, I
you
think I
wanna
said
take
last
both
time,
windows out of
requires
there, shove
further
them over here,
separation
just
for
shove
longer
one
building
here. Just one
facades
here.
off a side property
Yeah,
line.
I'd say so.
So that was just my thinking. I mean, nothing has to be put there.
Or to be up on the roof.
I just think it breaks up the massing to do something.
We're talking about a garage back in the woods.
You could do that.
I don't know what they're doing. Let someone else make
Also
that
being
work.
cognizant, it's a cost to do these things, so trying to, you know.
Well, if we have a 40-foot wall on the right elevation, we can put a skylight in the shingle that from the side, I'm just saying out loud. If you want a gable on the roof in the middle of the 40-foot wall, it's 3 sheets of plywood and an extra bundle of shingles.
But to me, it's not super expensive to do
No.
that, but, you know.
No, it's not. It's not gonna break anybody's budget.
Help me to understand,
It's
is
the
that
window.
not in construction, a gable would be on their roof? Or like
Yes.
just something that pops out?
It would be on the roof because there's no door to
Correct.
be over the door.
Correct.
It would look like that.
This on the
And
side.
then you take your windows out of there, put one window over there.
Yeah, it saves you one
Or
window.
put one window under the gable, and like Tom said, put the other window between the service doors on the left
That's an
side.
idea too, put the window over there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, or like, with one of those like
Decorative.
octagon, you
Yeah.
know,
It's
type
decorative.
windows that's not accessible.
A little
You know,
window, a little
from-
window up here.
Put that up in the gate.
A
Yeah,
little
but
tiny
we put it
window.
up further, like is that.
Now you got
And
something.
cross both these out.
Cross these out.
See,
I'd say, that makes sense.
So get rid of the windows on the right
We got a
side,
plan.
put some kind of gable.
We got a plan up here.
On the roof.
Like a dormer type?
Yeah.
Put the window in the gable on the long wall.
A little
It's gonna be
window.
on the roof anyway, the gable's gonna be on the roof line. Put the window in there,
Yeah,
and the other window between the doors.
Yeah. Window or no window, again, I'm just trying to break up a long building facade is, in my mind.
That'd be
It'd be
nice.
the future home of the planning commission. I'm okay with that.
Sounds like we got a plan.
So then there'd be one window between these two doors.
Windows.
That makes sense.
Window or whatever.
Let's make sure we're all in agreement.
Yeah, it'll be an octagonal.
Ask him.
You're gonna have one window between the two doors, a gable, a window in the gable, and get rid of this.
Yes.
So, that's safety purposes.
That addresses Mr. Durb's concern and, you know.
Can we move on this?
Let's go.
Should I?
Go for it.
Are we ready for a motion?
I think so.
I'd move we approve the application per our discussion of a gable over the, what side of that?
Right side, north side.
The right north side, a gable possibly with a small window in it, up on the roof. And on the other side of the building, the two doors with a window between, one window between.
And the gable on the north side will be in the middle of the 40 feet.
Yeah.
Gables over the doors.
The other one was,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
all right.
And verifying that the type and
I second that, and I think we should add that pursuant to architecture and engineer's approval.
Pursuant to the architecture and engineer's approval.
Add to that, add that on.
Yes, I amended, add that onto it. You wanted something about the vinyl siding,
the
to match
roofing
the
and the
house.
siding
Yeah.
have to be the same
Yeah.
type.
We have that
and
all
color.
approved.
All right.
Second, the amendment.
Board discussion.
Why do we need a window on between two doors? Do we have to have that too?
We
No, we
eliminated
don't
one
have
window
to.
for
You
it.
know, I mean, if we're moving the windows off the other side, and putting it on the gable on the other side, why would we want a window in there? Do we need a window in there?
That's
Could
what
be
we,
like-
that's what we originally had, so that's what we wanted.
You
So,
want that?
yeah.
They're happy with it.
Yeah,
They're
that's, we
happy.
can see that side fully from our.
They're happy.
Of course, see that.
No, no.
No, I'd rather have more windows on that side.
All right.
That's the side I can see from the house.
Compared to a window in the door, like a 9-light window on the upper half of each surface. I think we'll look better with the center window.
We're moving the center window.
Second
I
of
think
window.
it'll look better.
Yeah.
Hopefully we agree.
All right, so just to review, the motion, I think, is the removal of the two windows on the north side.
Right.
Yes.
Add a dormer or gable on the roof, on the south side or the left side. Add a window between the doors, and I believe that's it.
I think you said something wrong. Wasn't the gable on the north
North
side?
side.
Yeah.
A gable on the north side.
Well, I don't know what I said.
You said on the left side.
The right side
Sorry.
is the north side, the left side is the south side.
You're showing, okay, like the picture. So the gable dormer on the north
Yes.
or right side, with
Yes.
removal of the windows on that side.
Yes.
On the south or left side, a window between the two doors.
Yes.
Um,
South
I
side.
think we mentioned
Subject
the
to
color, materials to
architecture.
match.
What was that, what did you say, pursuant to?
Engineer and architect.
The site grading, yeah.
Engineer.
Approval of the site grading.
Did we want to add something about a 7x7 French drain? Did we need to do that?
I'm gonna do the 7x7.
I think it's an engineering.
All right.
Can't be hard to,
Yeah, he'll show the dimensions on the plan and then myself pursues
Okay.
it if you make sure that the dimensions are on there. Submits his, final plans.
All right, so we have a motion, a second. A second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry it took so long.
I think it'll be.
you got it.
So I'll have my architect that make these minor revisions, and I'll turn that into you, Nina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Is that the last? All right. Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that one.
All right, all in favor?
Yeah. Aye.
So we're gonna meet.
Yeah.
Let me,
Whenever you're available. My only concern is, you know.
we'll see you.
I can't be.
Must be Kevin.
Yeah. Oh, I don't tell her anything.
You have to get that impression.
Yeah.
Yeah, why would you have it?